Hello, and welcome back to Ballinspring again. Ballyspring, sorry. It's Ballincraig, Ballyspring. Now, I'm doing this video because AK asked me in the comments of my last video to sort of give a bit of an overview of the electoral system in New Zealand and how it works. So I'm going to do that, but I'm just going to give a heads up beforehand. One of the things, I'm not going to talk about the way I vote or my personal feelings in terms of the different parties or anything, and the reason for that is that without going into any details or anything, I actually work for the government. Now, I won't, if at the next elections, and the next elections are in November of this year in actual fact, if the opposite party than what's currently in gets in, I won't lose my job. My job is such that I'll retain my job regardless of what party's in power, but it means that whatever party's in power, I'm working for that for that party, and it's my job to help ensure that whatever policies that party puts in place come into being. So therefore, although I'm entitled to vote whatever way I want in the elections, I have to be seen as being very, very neutral, because whatever party is in power, that's the party that I am working for. So although I'm happy to discuss sort of a high level overview, as it were, of our electoral system and how it works, I won't be getting into any discussions either in this video or in the comments or anything afterwards on what way I personally vote or anything, and that's the reason why. It's simply that whatever party gets in, that party is in effect my employer, and I have to work to put their policies in place regardless of whether it's the party I personally vote for or not. Okay, so first of all, in New Zealand, unlike in the States, in New Zealand elections are every 3 years, and there are no midterms or anything like that, so it's just 3 yearly. Whatever parties get in, they're in for the next 3 years. Now, we do operate an MMP system, which is something or other, member proportional. I can't remember what the first M stands for in actual fact. I should really Google it, but I've got my timer going on my phone, so I can't Google on the phone at the moment. Oh, mixed member proportional. Okay, now I'm not going to sort of go into too much detail of what mixed member proportional means, and you can Google what is the MMP electoral system if you want to know more about mixed member proportional, but again I will give you a very, very high level overview. What it means is that very rarely in New Zealand does one party rule on its own. It can happen, but it's very, very rare for it to happen. How it would generally work is that there are 6 main parties in New Zealand, well, 2 that are the largest parties, and then 4 others that are smaller but are still reasonably big parties. Okay, 3 of them are left-leaning and 3 of them are right-leaning. Okay, and so generally no one party will get enough votes to rule on its own, so they'll have to form a government with using the other 2 parties that are going to sort of have similar views to theirs in order to form a government. So it does mean like the Prime Minister will be the leader of one party, the Deputy Prime Minister would generally be the leader of one of the other smaller parties, and it means there's going to be some compromise, that no party is going to get 100% all their own way all the time, because they have to work in conjunction with a couple of other parties as well. So now another difference between New Zealand political parties and American is the main right-leaning party in New Zealand is called National, and their colour is blue, and the main left-leaning party in New Zealand is called Labour, and their colour is red. And from my understanding, that's the opposite way around of America, where the red party is the one that would be more right-leaning, and the blue party would be the one that's more left-leaning. So our is actually the opposite, the colours sort of thing. So at the moment, National are in power and they're the government. So National, as I said, rule with two other parties, which would be ACT and New Zealand First. So ACT, New Zealand First and National are the three right-leaning parties, and Labour, Te Party Māori and the Greens are the three left-leaning parties. Now, I should say that in New Zealand, they're probably, by American standards, they're all pretty middle-of-the-road parties. None of them are overly right-leaning, and none of them are overly left-leaning. So, yeah, by American standards, they're probably all pretty centre. There's no hard right or hard left parties in New Zealand, I would say, really. Some of them are slightly more leaning than others, but none of them are like really sort of hardcore in either direction, I don't really think. Now, so as I said, we only MP. Now, because New Zealand is a fairly small country, we don't have, like in America you have different states. We don't have different states, so the taxes, there's no sort of in America you get state taxes, and then you also get the overall taxes. So like I can't remember what the other one's called off the top of my head, because obviously I don't work in the American system. But in New Zealand you don't get that. You only get one lot of taxes, which is just the taxes that the laws of the day demand. What you do get is different areas where have councils. Okay, so if it's a it'll be a district council if it's for one city or something. So like, for example, where I live, we have the Lower Hutt District Council, and if it covers a whole region, it covers a number of towns, maybe a couple of cities or something, then it would be called a regional council. So you get regional councils or district councils. Each area will only be covered by one or the other, so you can never be covered by both. Now, the councils don't, as I said, come up with their own taxes and things, so they all just have to. The only thing that they do, sort of, I suppose, as a tax really, is rates. So each council can decide how much rates homeowners have to pay in their area for that year. So, as I said, at the moment I'm in the area I live, I'm covered by the Lower Hutt District Council. Now, there was some talk at one stage about combining the Lower Hutt District Council, the Upper Hutt District Council and the Wellington District Council, and I've got to say that talk came to nothing. And one of the main reasons that talk has come to nothing is, and this is my opinion I suppose, so don't take it as gospel, but the Wellington District Council, which is the biggest of those three by far, has a lot of problems with water pipes and things at the moment. A lot of them are very old and they're leaking, so they're looking at having to spend large amounts of money to get it fixed. Whereas Lower Hutt District Council, comparatively, has very good water pipes and is fairly well off at the moment. So obviously people that live in Lower Hutt don't want to be subsidising to repair things for people in Wellington when they've sort of taken care of their things and done regular maintenance on them throughout the years. So that's why those councils haven't combined. But that talk came about because I mentioned Auckland in my last video, and I don't even remember now what I mentioned Auckland about. But Auckland is about 8 hours from us, from where I live. So Auckland's about 2/3 of the way up the North Island. I'm at the very bottom of the North Island. Okay, so New Zealand's made up of 3 islands, but 2 main ones that people live on, called the North Island and the South Island. Just keep it really simple, because let's be honest, New Zealanders are pretty simple people, really. So I live in Lower Hutt, which is sort of next door to Wellington, so I can push bike into Wellington City in about 45 minutes. I can drive in depending on the weather, depending on the traffic, sorry, either 15 to 20 minutes or half an hour, depending on traffic. And Wellington City is the capital city of New Zealand. It didn't used to be the capital, but has been for many, many years now. Like many, many countries, in fact, it's not the biggest city in New Zealand. So Auckland is the biggest city in New Zealand by far. I'm not a big fan of driving around Auckland, I must say. There's two reasons for that. One, I don't go there very often, so I don't know my way around. I do have to rely on either GPS or maps, and the car I've got now is too old to have GPS in it, so I'd have to rely on a passenger having their phone and their lap sort of thing telling me which way to go, or maps. Now, one of the problems with Auckland, I've got friends that live in Auckland, so I'm not going to knock it or anything, but the motorway exits in Auckland are a very, very long way apart from each other. So if you miss your motorway exit, because you're not really 100% sure of where you're going and things, you may have to drive a very long way to get to the next motorway off-ramp. It could add an extra 45 minutes or so to your journey perhaps. Wellington, which as I said is very, very close to where I live, and I know Wellington reasonably well, Wellington is more compact than Auckland, much more compact than Auckland, and as a result all the motorway exits are very, very close together. So if you missed your motorway exit in Wellington and you had to come off at the next one instead, you might add an extra 5 minutes to your journey, but that would be all, because the motorway exits are so close to each other. So I do quite like that about Wellington, although Wellington probably doesn't have as much nice weather as Auckland does. In fact, it would be fair to say that most convertibles in New Zealand would be in Auckland, because the weather's an awful lot nicer up there than it is down where we are. So I've sort of covered regional councils and district councils and how they look after the area that they're the council for. Now, we have separate council elections to the main elections, although I've got to say that generally speaking the voter turnout for council elections is very, very low. So although in theory your local council is voted on by the people and therefore it's the people's choice as to who's on the local council, in reality so many people just don't bother voting in the council elections, they only vote in the actual general elections, that really what decides who the council is isn't so much all of the people, but all of the people that can be bothered actually studying up what different people are standing on, what platforms they stand for and things, and take the time to actually vote. And as I said, so many people don't vote in the local election, in the council elections, they only vote in the general elections, which happen once every 3 years. What else to tell you about government? One thing that's quite different about New Zealand government from, say, American government, from what I can tell, I think this is perhaps beginning to change slightly, but on the whole what I'm about to say is still true, that New Zealand's not as politically divided as America would appear to be. So, for example, every election people go and vote for whatever party they want to see in power, but at the end of the day, whatever party gets into power, regardless of whether it's the party you voted for or not, you will, generally speaking, New Zealanders would accept that yes, that is my government, that is my Prime Minister, so we have a Prime Minister rather than a President, whereas in America, I'm only basing this on videos I've seen and things, it's very, very divided in terms of politics, and if the president is not the party that you voted, is not the person that you voted for, you might turn around and say, well, that's not my president because I never voted for them. Whereas, as I said, in New Zealand it's less divided than that, so you're going to accept that the government of the day is the government of the day, irrespective of whether you voted for them or not. Now, every vote has equal count in New Zealand elections, so because in the American elections you have like seats and things, so your vote might be counted more than a vote from someone that lives in a different area, kind of thing. And I don't understand exactly how that works, but in New Zealand it's not like that at all. So every vote has equal power. Your vote has as much count towards who gets into Parliament as anybody else's vote in New Zealand. Okay, as I said, there are no midterms in New Zealand. So now another thing that I'm basing this on YouTube and what I've seen on YouTube, because I've never lived in America, I've never experienced American things firsthand, but it seems that school boards are completely different between our two countries. So I was on our local school board for 12 years, and I was actually the board chair for 9 of those 12. Okay, now in New Zealand, so I've seen on YouTube first of all like videos where you got angry parents talking to the school board about books they've chosen to put in the library and things like that. Well, in New Zealand, the school board doesn't get to choose anything like that. So the school board is voted in. It's certainly not a full-time job. I don't know whether it's a full-time job in the States or not. But in New Zealand, I think from memory, and it's been a few years now since I was on a school board, but I think from memory you get something like $12.50 per meeting you attend, and you don't get paid anything for all the work you do between meetings. So basically no one would ever go on a school board in New Zealand for the money, because quite frankly, if you went to and say got a part-time job at McDonald's and just did the same number of hours as what you'll spend doing Board of Trustees work, you'd end up getting a lot more money just working at McDonald's than you'd ever earn on a school board. So no one in New Zealand would ever try and get on a school board for financial reasons. I don't know whether that's the case in the States or not, but like I've seen, as I said, YouTube videos where the board members are sitting up behind big benches and it almost looks like they're in a court of law or something with judges and the like, and it's absolutely nothing like that in New Zealand. It's very you just sit around in a circle on chairs, and although the board meetings are open to the public, it would be very, very unusual indeed for a parent to come along to a board meeting, because they would find it very boring. So what a school board does in New Zealand is they would be responsible for choosing who the principal of the school is going to be when, so like if the principal of the school that you're on the board of is retiring or moving on to another job, the school board would choose a few people from the board to do the interviewing and things to choose the next principal. They will also have a say in choosing the deputy principal, but they won't have a say in choosing teachers really. So the principal and deputy principal would interview for teachers when there's teachers' positions available. They don't get a say in things like what books are in the library or anything like that. So in New Zealand, what the school board does is they have a high level overview of the budget for the school basically. So for example, you might decide, well, a lot of the students at our school are struggling with maths, so let's put X amount of our budget towards getting some extra teacher aides in to help with maths classes, to try and get the maths levels up within the school. Or if your school is doing quite well with maths but perhaps not so well with English, the school board might vote to put more of the budget towards English, sort of thing. So they do the high level thing of the budget for the school, but they don't get involved in the everyday running of the school, the day-to-day stuff. That would come down to the principal. That would be the principal's job to do that. So yeah, as I said, there's no way that the school board would have any say whatsoever in what books are in the library or anything like that. That's just not how it works in New Zealand. A school board is much more high level overview type stuff. As a result, it would appear, and this is only my appearance, I could be wrong, but I'm basing this on YouTube videos and things, like if someone's on a school board in the States, it's perhaps not something that is very highly considered of them. So, people wouldn't think, oh, you must be, wouldn't think highly of you if you said I'm on a school board. Whereas in New Zealand, it would be a bit more. I mean, anyone could get voted on, but you're likely to have a bit more. I don't know. But you've got to really care about your school, go on the school board and things, because as I said, you're not. From a financial perspective, it's absolutely not worth going on a school board. So you're doing it, generally speaking, because you've got children of your own in the school, and you care about the school and the way the school's being run, and the things are important to the school things. So, yeah, it would appear that school boards are quite different in New Zealand than what they are in the States. It's quite funny because one of the other big differences is in New Zealand, you can't sue people, generally speaking, okay? So what we do is we have ACC, which is Accident Compensation Corporation. So let's say, for example, I had an accident and as a result I couldn't work for a couple of months, say, while I was healing. I would go on ACC, and ACC would pay me 80% of my normal wage, and my employer has the option of topping up the other 20% if they want to. They don't have to. But of course, I also would be saving money, so I wouldn't be driving to or from work and things like this. And so I'd be on ACC while I was healing from an accident, and therefore there's no ability to sue in New Zealand, to sue someone. Therefore, in New Zealand, if you're a lawyer, that's considered a very, very high up job, quite an important job. People, if you told someone you're a lawyer, they're going to think of you very, very highly and understand that you're obviously very well educated and very smart. Whereas, again, this is my understanding, and I could be not completely 100% correct in my understanding, but my understanding is in the States, if you said you're a lawyer, people are going to think of you perhaps as being an ambulance chaser or something, and it's not a very admired profession at all. Whereas in New Zealand, if you're a lawyer, it's a very, very much admired profession. But yeah, from my understanding, in the States, lawyers are thought of on about the same level as, say, a used car salesman might be. So I think, yeah. So anyway, going back to New Zealand and the layout of New Zealand, as I said, it's quite a small country, and because if you look at New Zealand on a globe or something, you'll see that we're a long, skinny country, so all of New Zealand's in the same time zone. If you turned it a quarter turn, we'd cover a couple of different time zones, but because it's basically up and down on the globe, all of New Zealand's in the same time zone. Now, the North Island, I started talking about this before, so the North Island has a much, much bigger population of people than the South Island does. Generally speaking, it's flatter, the North Island. We do have some hills, we even have a mountain that you can go skiing at and things, but generally speaking it's flat in the South Island. Has a lot more people in it, a lot less farmland and things, but the farms that we do have in the North Island are quite different to the farms in the South Island. So, like I've said a number of times, I love the UK and the Irish maps because they kind of remind me of New Zealand farms, and when I say that, they remind me of North Island farms. The New Zealand maps you see, and there's been a few of them made, would appear to me to all be South Island farms based on the way they've done them. Yeah, the South Island, and you can fly between the islands, or you can take a ferry. The ferry, you can take your car on it. It takes about 3 hours, so I think it's about 2.5 hours travel time, and because you've got to book, you've got to load the ferry, and you've got to be there before it leaves, I can't remember how, 45 minutes before it leaves or something like that. So it's going to take you about 3 hours to cross from one island to the other by ferry. A lot less flying, of course, but if you want to take a car, then the ferry is the only option you've got for doing it. We have reasonable sized ferries, so you can fit cars and trucks on them and things. And the South Island is a lot more sparsely populated than the North Island, a lot more farmland, everything's sort of more spread out, but it's also a lot more mountainous. Both islands are very, very popular with tourists. Probably the South Island is slightly more popular, and you may recall in one of my videos I mentioned that people in New Zealand would know this, but overseas tourists wouldn't. So if you're ever going to come to New Zealand, Auckland is where almost all of our international flights come in and out of, and most tourists will fly into Auckland, either hire a rental car or a rental camper van, slowly make their way down the North Island, cross into the South Island by ferry, and then go down to either Christchurch or Dunedin, depending on how long they've got to travel and things, and then hop on a national flight to fly back to Auckland and fly out of the country. And that's actually the expensive way of doing it, because all the international tourists do that, and as a result all of the rental cars and camper vans, a lot of them end up down the South Island than need in Auckland. And so what happens is the rental car companies will either hire car transporters to bring a whole lot of rental cars back all at once, or they'll do really good deals for anyone that wants to rent a car or a camper van and go in the opposite direction. So yeah, if you ever do want to come to New Zealand as an international tourist, my advice to you would be fly into Auckland, then straight away hop on a national flight to fly down to Christchurch or Dunedin, have your pre-book a camper van or a rental car in advance, so you know there'll be one waiting there for you, and then slowly drive back up the South Island, across the ferry, then up the North Island and drive back to Auckland. You will get a much, much better deal with your camper van or your rental car heading north, picking it up from the South Island and delivering it to Auckland, than you will doing the opposite way, picking it up at Auckland and driving down, because the rental places are always running out of camper vans and cars in Auckland and needing to make arrangements to get them all brought back from further south down the country. So yeah, if you're ever going to come to New Zealand as a tourist, do that. Fly into Auckland, because it's pretty much the only city you can fly into for an international flight. Then immediately jump onto a national flight and fly down to the South Island, where you will pick up your rental car or your camper van and drive it back to Auckland, and do it that way. So I think I wanted to cover school boards, which I've covered. I wanted to give a high level overview of politics, which I think I've done. I've talked about MMP, I've talked about how we'll generally have three parties that are all co-governing, and so hopefully, okay, I've sort of covered a wee bit of what you wanted to hear about politically and things. As I said, I've kept it very, very neutral politically, and that's deliberate, and if anyone does ask any questions around that in this video, I won't be answering them. I am going to remain absolutely politically neutral in all my comments and in this video. So if you've got questions, perhaps there's something I haven't covered when I was talking about politics and things, I'm happy to answer questions, but I'll be answering them from a very politically neutral stance, so don't ask questions that I can't answer in that way. Okay, thank you very much all of you, and I'll catch up with you again later. Bye.